Hey everyone, Alex here from Peppermint Games, and today we're going to be starting a tutorial on how to program a Gradius-like game. For those of you who don't know, Gradius is a side-scrolling space shooter game in which the player must dodge and destroy enemies, pick up power-ups, and defeat bosses. So there's a lot of content we can pull from, which is why we selected this game to teach you. Today we're going to be setting up our project, programming our movement, and discussing how different movement styles can influence how a game turns out. So the first step in any game development project is opening up the engine you use. For the purposes of this lesson, I'll be using Unity's engine at version 2019.2.6f1. Once you've got your project open, you're going to notice that you don't really have anything in your assets folder. So to start off, we're going to go ahead and create a scene that we're going to go ahead and call our game scene, just like so. Once we have that, we want to do a little bit of organization. So we're going to go ahead and create some folders, one for our prefabs, one for our scenes, one for our materials, and then one more for our scripts. Once you've done that, go ahead and double click on your game scene to open up. You'll notice that this has now changed to scene. Make sure you're in 2D mode, hop over to your camera, and then switch your projection value from perspective to orthographic. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and drag our game scene into our scenes folder, and we're all ready to start building. Alright, now that we've set up our scene and our project, we're going to go ahead and build our character now. So what we're going to do is going to go ahead and right click, go to 3D object, create a cube. This here is going to be our player, so we're going to go ahead and rename that actually to player. Now the player needs to have a few specific things on it. It needs to have a box collider, which we're going to go ahead and make sure it's not a trigger. We need to add a rigid body to it, which we're going to go ahead and make sure it's kinetic and has use gravity turned off. We also need to make sure it's constrained on the rotation on the X, Y, and Z values, like so. And then we also need to add a script on it called player. So to do that, we're just going to type in player, new script, create an add. Let that go ahead and compile, get ready to go, and then when that's ready, we're going to go ahead and open up that script in Visual Studio. Alright, so here we have our player script. Now this is where we're going to be doing our movement, our score, all that sort of thing. And I actually want to take a moment now to discuss the type of movement we're going to be doing. So normally Gradius and games like it have the player being able to move around the screen freely with the joystick, the WASD keys, arrow keys, things like that. And that lets them dodge enemies, bullets, etc. with a lot more ease, and the game focuses on the shooting aspect of things, more so the survival. For this project, I want to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to be using a Flappy Bird style of movement, where the player has to jump around the screen, not really controlling where they go, as so much as controlling the direction and strength at which they bounce. This will focus the game more towards surviving and dodging versus just straight up shooting, which will hopefully make the game rather different from your traditional side-scrolling shoot-'em-up style format. So the first thing we need to do for this is we need to set up our values. So first off, we're going to go ahead and set up a jump speed and then a lateral movement speed, which are going to be ints. So we're going to do public int jump speed and lateral speed, which stands, of course, for lateral movement and lateral speed. And what this will allow us to do is adjust how high the player jumps and how far forwards or back the player jumps, however we wish. That will allow us to later on do modifiers such as power-ups, things like that. After that, we're going to go ahead and make a couple game objects called camera cam and our fire point. And the reason we're setting this up here is so that way we can adjust our gun movements, things like that. Everything's happening inside the script. The final thing we're going to set up is something called a camera cam. And what that's going to allow us to do is that will detect where we're clicking on the screen. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is we need to define what camera cam is and what the cam actually is. And that's really easy to do. All that's happening is going to be happening in the start function. So what we're going to do is camera cam equals game object dot find game object with tag, like so, main camera. And what this does is it simply searches for the scene, all of the objects that are active currently, finds whatever it is that's tagged main camera, which is already built into every Unity scene that Unity generates, and that just assigns it in our script. Below that, we're doing cam now, equals camera cam, so that's our camera object, dot get component, camera. And so what this is letting us do now is it lets us access the camera component of the camera exactly, so we can adjust what we're seeing, what it's picking up, things like that. Very useful for our purposes for this game. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that everything's working properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up an input for our button click. And so what we're going to do is go if input.get key down keycode.mouse 0. And so that's going to do is whatever we put in here will trigger whenever we click the left mouse button. It'll only trigger once, and that's when the mouse goes down, and then when the mouse comes back up, it will be able to trigger it again. So we're going to just go ahead and do get component, rigid body, dot velocity equals vector2 dot 0. And what that is doing is whenever we click it, our object, even though it's falling, will just sort of stop in midair. And that will just let us adjust whenever we jump, whenever we move. We don't have to worry about it being already dragged down. We don't have to worry about it being dragged in a different direction. Everything's happening as if the object has just been spawned in, which we're going to do right now, actually, which is going to be just simply get component, rigid body, dot add force, right, vector2 dot up times jump speed. And so all we're doing right now is we're not doing the forward or back movement. All we're doing is just testing, will it jump up and will it fall back down? And to do that, we're going to go ahead and add something else here, which is going to happen right up here in start. And that is going to be get component rigid body dot is kinematic equals false, and get component rigid body dot use gravity equals true. Now, you'll notice that this directly contradicts what I've already done in scene. I've done it intentionally that way. Whatever we change in scene gets redone in here, and it just sort of overrules whatever we've done in the inspector. Right, so now that this has finished compiling and being built, we're going to go and hop back over into Unity, and you can see that our new player script has popped out outside of our folders. That happens whenever we do the create and add function. So we're just going to go ahead and drag that into our scripts folder to make sure everything is nice and organized. After doing that, you can see our player here. You can see if we hop over to here, we've got it kinematic. We don't have it using gravity. Our script is shown up here. Don't worry about that. That's going to all get filled out, or it's going to stay null. We don't really mind that right now. As soon as we hit play, you'll see that it begins to fall, and we hop click it, and you can see how it begins to come back down. Now, the reason it's not jumping up very high is because it's got a lot of mass to it, which we're going to go and fix by clicking on our cube, going to here, and just going to be typing in, say, 0.1. Go ahead and hit save, and we'll go ahead and test and show you just what kind of a difference that simple fix makes. So notice it didn't quite work, and that's because I forgot to change our jump speed down here. I'm just going to go ahead and put that to, let's say, a 10. And now when we hit play, sorry about that, we should see that our player does indeed begin moving up. Now it's not moving up a lot because there's still a lot of mass on it. So we're just going to go ahead and change it to, say, 0.01, and we'll see how that looks now. Yeah, that's a little bit better. We can see it's moving up. We're going to go and adjust that. And you can fiddle around to find out what works for you. I'm just going to go and leave it at 0.05. Actually, I'll go ahead and change it to 0.025, just to make a little bit more of a bounce. We don't want it to be too difficult for our players. Right, so now if we go ahead and hit play, and you can also do that, by the way, just changing the jump speed down here. I'm just doing mass, that way we have a nice baseline. Go ahead and hit play, and you can see that our player bounces whenever we click, and it doesn't fall anymore as soon as we click because we're setting that velocity to 0. Great. So now that we've got that working, we're going to go ahead and set up a little bit of a scene so we can get our lateral movement working. So what we're going to do for that, we're going to go ahead and create a quad, and we're just going to go ahead and scale that up nice and big. Go ahead and hop out of 2D mode really quick so we can put this behind our player. And what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to set up a material for our quad and for our player over here in our assets, materials folder. That way it's a little bit more easy to distinguish between the two of them. So the way that you do that, right click, go up to your create function, click material, and you'll see that this pops down here. So our player, we'll just keep him white. And for our quad, create material, and we'll name this one quad. We'll go ahead and just make this one black. So it's a little bit nicer to look at. And there we go. So now that we have our background set up, we can go ahead and enable our lateral movement. So what we're going to do is we're going to head back into Visual Studio, and below here, we can go ahead and set up a raycast. Now what this will do is it sends out basically an invisible line from our camera straight onto our background, and it will detect the position that it hits at, and we can use that to detect which way we're going to be moving. So what I've just done here is I've used the cam function that we assigned up here, and so it's just calling from the camera right wherever our mouse is. Whenever we click, it's just going to zip that line down, hit on our background, and that's going to send out this information here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put an if statement, physics.raycast, ray, because we're calling this ray here. So what we're saying is if this ray hits something, which it does, then we run the following function. And what our function is going to be is if our hit.point.x less than transform.position.x, so that's our player's transform, meaning that if we click to the left of it, we will move to the left. So game object, get component, add force, just like we had jumping up. Now we're going to be moving to the left. Vector2 dot left times lat speed, and then that's all we're going to have for right there. Now what you saw me start to type beforehand was I'll just show you really quickly, was something called this.gameObject, and what that does, it just makes sure that we're only calling it on the object the script is assigned to. If we're having something else be manipulated, then we just do, for example, if we had the fire point moving, we would do firepoint.gameObject. And that just calls, as you can see there. Just something to make sure everything is working how you want it to be, but it's not very necessary in this point because we've only got the one game object right now. After this, we're going to go ahead and say else, and what that means is if it's to the right of where we hit, then we will simply move to the right. So same thing we did here, where we had rigid body add force. But unlike the previous one, we're going to do dot right times lat speed. And just go ahead and save out that. And so once that's finished compiling, we can go ahead and click on our player again. And you can see down here the lat speed is 0. So we're going to go ahead and change that to a 10, just like our jump speed. So now we hit play, we save and hit play. You should see that we jump to the left and to the right, just like we want. You can see we're moving further left and right than we are up and down. That's just the way Unity works, because up and down you're fighting gravity, left and right, you're just moving that base direction. And so that's all we're really going to be doing for our basic movement. In the next episode, we will be covering some more advanced movement mechanics, such as when you click closer to the player, it'll move less, further away, it'll move a bit more, and that will enable the player to have a little bit more control over where the character moves.